Hi, welcome to this week's edition of PHQ, questions from the personality hacker community. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And Addison, let's get right to our question today.
Hello. I have just finished a book called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. I have a question that involves the main premise of the book, that emotional intelligence is very important and worth developing, and personality typology. In the book, Goleman suggests that in order for one to be emotionally intelligent, one has to be proficient in 5 areas: self-awareness, self-regulation, internal motivation, empathy, and social skills. I'm an INTP, and generally my FE only comes out when I am out of control emotionally. On a regular basis, I don't think about it, and when I try to understand my feelings or the feelings of others, I often either come up blank or with very crude estimates of how people are feeling, such as angry or embarrassed. I often have a very hard time connecting to others emotionally, but I do want to develop some emotional intelligence, as I can definitely see the benefit to doing this. Can you do a podcast on how different types can develop emotional intelligence through their primary or secondary cognitive functions, as opposed to resorting to their underdeveloped tertiary or inferior functions? Thanks, Lillian.
Thanks, Lillian, for the question. This can definitely be a challenge for thinker types, especially INTPs, I think, struggle with this emotional piece. It feels, I think for a lot of INTPs, when we come to the realm of emotions, it can feel very much out of control. And, you know, Antonia uses this phrase a lot, there be dragons there. You don't know what's going to happen. Am I going to be able to handle an emotional situation? I want to feel connected to people, but when I go down this emotional road, I just don't understand it. It feels so weird. You know, at best, it feels odd and off. At worst, it feels icky, and I just can't handle it. So I think this is a great question for a lot of thinkers that listen, and particularly INTPs.
So, okay, this is a bit of a tough one because, first of all, I know that people have indicated that EQ is more important than IQ. In recent times. I think I've read that like in multiple different places, you know, like your EQ is so much more important than your IQ. And then of course CQ, your creative intelligence or creative quotient, comes online. And then Malcolm Gladwell made this argument in Outliers that your creative intelligence is so much more important than your IQ, your intelligence quotient. And I think that these are all to some extent true. They're all contextually true. We have a tendency to place value on the thing that we're the most strong in. So my speculation is that one of the reasons why INTJs and INTPs do the best on IQ, like traditional standard IQ tests, is because the IQ tests are written by INTJs and INTPs, right? So they're going to place value in the areas that are the most, value to them as an individual. We can't help but bring our bias in. My suspicion is, and by the way, I love the book. I love the book Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. So I'm not saying that I'm not digging it. But my suspicion is that Daniel Goleman's probably an NF. He's an intuitive feeler. So he places a lot of value on the area that he favors. And we all do that. We all overvalue the goals, or not the goals, but the tools we bring, to the table.
Yeah, and this is one of the biggest reasons for Personality Hacker, is we understand that everybody's personal development journey is different. We understand that what book works for one person may not work for a different personality type. And we understand that when you approach personal growth and personal development, part of that is finding the resources, the materials, the trainings that align with what the values and the things that you bring to the table that are strengths. So for an INTP, the mileage may vary, just in general terms, for a book like Emotional Intelligence, because that's going to be your 3-year-old in the car model that we use. That extroverted feeling process, or what we've nicknamed harmony, is in your 3-year-old process. And so mileage may vary. And I think the book, as an NF myself, I think it's great. I think emotional intelligence is extremely important. I never have placed as much value on IQ tests as much as I do on EQ, but that's because I show up with that as a strength. So I think this comes to the heart of what we're trying to do here at Personality Hackers: contextualize personal growth and personal development for you as a unique individual and the personality type you bring to the table.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. That said, I don't believe that thinkers are disqualified from having high emotional intelligence. Just like I don't believe that feelers are disqualified from having high IQ. right? And
I agree.
I don't think that judgers or people who are leading with a judging process, and that's different, right? A judger is different than somebody leading with a judging process. But there's like this sense that judgers or people leading with judging processes like extroverted thinking or extroverted feeling are less creative than other types. I don't think that that's necessarily true either. I think that they can show up with having a very high CQ, creative quotient. So it's a matter of understanding that we're all going to overvalue our tool set and say it's the most important, and just kind of taking that with a grain of salt. That said, I do believe that each type can become better at each of these different styles of quotients. And I don't think it's going to be done in the traditional way. You know, Joel, you just mentioned that for an INTP, that their extroverted feeling or harmony process is their inferior, or what we'd call their 3-year-old. And that might be a trip up for them in their emotional intelligence. And I just had a coaching call with an INTP where we had this very same conversation around becoming better at their extroverted feeling cognitive function or their harmony function by becoming better at introverted thinking or accuracy. The better they get at their accuracy process, the more they're going to see gains in their social awareness or their social acceptability. Because all of us have a desire to hear radical honesty. Like our inner wisdom tells us that people who are just radically honest, the people who just like absolutely not that whole like, well, I just tell it how it is. I don't mean that kind. I mean like the person who literally will not lie to you, who will not, as a part of their personal integrity, will not lie to themselves or to you, if at all possible. There's a sense of resting into that we all have. And so when, as thinkers, regardless of our type, when we increase our skills in our particular skill set, I believe that bleeds over into our other heightened intelligence, like emotional intelligence. So let's take Goldman's theory just as an example. And I'm going to say Goldman's theory because if you look at the world of emotional intelligence, he's not the final authority on it. There's actually multiple different philosophies around emotional intelligence. Please feel free to look it up on the Wikipedia, on a Wikipedia article. There's multiple different styles of theories on emotional intelligence and how they show up, and some of it's modeling and some of it's, theorizing, etc. But let's take what you mentioned, which are the 5 foundations of Goldman's theory on emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness, self-regulation, social skill, empathy, and motivation. We're going to do this slightly differently. And the one thing that we here at Personality Hacker just like harp on and on and on and on about is develop your auxiliary process. That co-pilot process in your car, you got to develop that. And one of the reasons is that the co-pilot process will make up for the deficiencies that you have in your 3-year-old or your inferior process. It just will, right? It's just going to take care of that. And it might not look like everybody else taking care of that because they'll just use the cognitive function that you're crappy at. They'll use that because they have it as a tool available to you, to them, but you don't have it available to you. So what you have to do is you have to come up with creative solutions and figure out how to personalize these tools. All right, so let's take self-awareness. And yeah, for an INTP and other thinking types, self-awareness is difficult. Now, I'd say it's probably more difficult for the NTPs or the STPs, all the thinker perceivers, the ones that are using introverted thinking. Because when they go internal, when they go introspective, they're going to go to their conceptual realm. They're going to go to a cerebral place. For the TJs, right, the thinker judgers, they actually have introverted feeling somewhere in their car or in their cognitive function stack. So they actually, interestingly enough, have more access to introverted feeling than thinker perceivers do. So thinkers that are, even the ones who are using introverted feeling or authenticity as their 3-year-old or inferior process, they're going to have more access to introverted feeling than a lot of us thinker perceivers are. And so self-awareness is going to feel really debilitating to thinker perceivers sometimes. Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? What's going on here? One of the best ways to regulate is to not do it like everybody else is doing it by going internal and really like being aware of your feelings, right? And like asking yourself why am I feeling the emotion that I'm feeling in the moment? You're actually going to be regulating this based on your behavior. Use your extroverted processes to help with this regulation. One of the ways that I've utilized a sort of a definition for increasing my personal self-awareness, and definitions are very important for thinkers, right? To get really clear on our definitions, is I've learned the difference between, say, modesty and humility. Humility is not thinking you're better than anybody else, but modesty is understanding your limitations. Modesty is a sense of not falsifying your limitations by creating them when they're not actually there, but also not aggrandizing yourself if you don't actually have those skills. So it's about being radically honest with exactly what you're bringing to the table. And that's a major piece of self-awareness. Goleman talks about understanding your emotions, your strengths, your weaknesses, your drives, your values, your goals, right? Like that's self-awareness. And if you can go, all right, I'm going to be radically honest, right? I'm going to be radically honest with myself about what my actual strengths and weaknesses are, right? I'm not going to aggrandize. I'm going to try to metricize this to hit it right in the bullseye center. You're going to increase your self-awareness, right? Like you might not understand your motivations, but you kind of don't have to at that point, right? It doesn't really matter why. It's a matter of utilizing a tool of modesty to have increased self-awareness. And then just observe your behavior patterns. Use systems and models and maps to observe your behavior patterns and go, okay, so I know according to the model when I behave this way, it's probably this reason, right? And find the models and maps that are the most attractive to you and resonate the strongest with you. So if you don't have it as sort of just like a natural internalized process, then use a cheat, right? Use maps and models to do something that you don't necessarily have an internal way of doing that. And some of the greatest maps and models for that are Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Is it because I'm trying to meet a need that is going unmet? That's a great one. Some of the other ones are if I'm getting really like emotionally outrageous, what is it called? HALTs, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, right? And it's sort of a way to sort of check in with all the different components of what could be going on for you. I'm emotionally erratic. I'm not sure why I'm emotionally erratic. And then just stop and go, halt. Am I hungry? Right? Is that just what's going on? Is I'm malnourished? Am I angry for some reason? Am I lonely? Do I need that need met? Am I tired? Just kind of go through some of the basic biological components. You don't have to be like massively introspective to be able to go through a list and go, oh, I think maybe I'm just hungry right now and I'm malnourished. So I'm just going to go ahead and eat, get some protein and nutrients in my system, and maybe I won't be so emotionally erratic. Use your strengths of understanding maps and models to make up for natural deficiencies of introspection. The second piece is self-regulation. And I think all thinkers deal with self-regulation about, being able to control and redirect your emotions and impulses. I don't know anybody that this is not a test iterate for. Everybody has to allow themselves to go through an emotionally disruptive time period and then stop and go, okay, so why am I doing that? What's going on? And even if you don't know why, right? You've already gone through HALTs, right? Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and you're like, it's none of them. What's happening for me? It's okay. Watch the behaviors and look for the things that lead you there. Right? Like, what are the things what is the road or the trajectory that got you to that emotionally erratic place? And can you stop it off at the pass? Right? Like, you don't have to necessarily deconstruct the entire situation after it happened. You can just go, you know what? I'm pretty sure that when I talk to this one person, this is a trigger inside of me. So until I figure this piece out, maybe I'll limit my access to this person. And then go back and go, wait, that meant I was triggered. What was the triggering, event? What was the triggering, moment? And just really turn it into a system. Think in terms of systems thinking. Think in terms of nodes in the system. Use your natural talents for thought to be able to access that emotional component. And it doesn't have to be necessarily like figuring out all of your emotions. It can simply be like using a system to figure out when you're feeling certain emotions and why. And that's a way to, it's kind of like hacking the system. You can gain greater emotional intelligence without having to be like the introspective emo kid that's like painting their nails black and like thinking about their emotions all the time. You can just turn it into a system that can be replicated.
For the thinkers I've observed in my life, I think this is a big challenge, this idea of self-regulation, because I've noticed often that thinkers, particularly thinkers that have their feeling process as their 3-year-old. Okay, so we're talking about ETJs, ITPs in particular, and when your feeling process is your 3-year-old, by the time you notice emotions coming up for you, it's too late. It's already into a strong position. Maybe it's anger, or you've burst into tears and you feel so out of control. And it almost like you weren't aware one moment, and then the next moment, all of a sudden this emotion is happening to you. I think that probably feels very overwhelming to a thinker, because it's like, I was fine 3 minutes ago and now I've gone into a rage and I've yelled at this person. That was not my intention. Or I've burst into tears and now I feel weak and vulnerable now, here crying in front of these people or this person here. And it can be very unnerving at those levels. And I think that self-regulation piece is probably one of the most disconcerting parts, is that you feel almost out of control. And I think what you're talking about, that putting into systems, metricizing this, can help you get a little bit ahead of that before the iceberg pops through the surface and you actually see the emotion. You start to sense it underneath the surface brewing there, and the stacks that are happening, or the pressure that's building before that steam has to be let go. And I think that just comes through experience and time. When those things happen, instead of saying, man, I'm never going to allow that emotion to come out again, and suppressing, because that just will create that problem again. It's realizing that something's building here and being able to say, okay, I can feel this building. How do I navigate this space before it happens to me? I'm a little bit more in control of this experience.
Yeah, and ITPs and ETJs, they all, like you just mentioned, lead with a thinking process. That means their co-pilot process is going to be their learning or perceiving process, and get into that co-pilot. Use your learning process to either, for an ETJ, go internal and watch your mind and kind of figure out what was the boiling point for you and what was the experience you had, and maybe even go into a meditation. Allow meditation to be a guide for you. If you're an ITP, that means that your co-pilot process is going to be an extroverted perceiving process or an extroverted learning process, and allow yourself to look at the context around you, right? Use your learning process, use that perceiving process to gain greater understanding of the situation, as opposed to, like you just mentioned, Joel, getting spooked and going, I'm never going to feel that again. Suppress. Like, let yourself test, iterate, right? That's what we bring to the table, is permission to test, iterate. We have enough distance from our emotions to be able to go, you know what? Sometimes I'm just going to lose control. Sometimes I'm just going to fail. And it's not about preventing yourself from ever failing again in the future. It's a matter of failing again and failing better, and not taking a major ego hit around it. So let yourself fail, and then let yourself study it like you were a scientist studying somebody else. Depersonalize it, turn it into a system in your mind, like you just mentioned, Joel, a metric, like look at the nodes in the system. How was an emotional breakdown or meltdown the emergent of the system, and what nodes can you change in the system?
I think that suggestion helps with the third piece, which is social skills. If you turn things into a game, into a system, into a study of a test, iterate, as you're working on that third piece of emotional intelligence, you're going to start seeing things in terms of patterns. And using that learning style again, that learning process again, especially if your feeling process is your 3-year-old or your inferior, you can start to see, okay, I see in this context, in this relationship in public is much different than this relationship in private. If I say this in public, this person gets very offended by me, and that's the social skill is playing out differently in this setting versus this, we're at home or we're just the two of us in a car. It doesn't seem to trigger this person. So now I'm seeing that context matters. And you're using some of these metrics and these ways of understanding in the social dynamic as well, how the social game is played.
Absolutely. The other thing is that I have not known a single personality type that when they show up as their best self is not celebrated by the people around them. And I don't care what type you're talking about. I don't care if you're talking about a type that has the least amount of social skills naturally. I know an INTP at the top of his game, and I know an ISTP at the top of her game. And both of them have just people surrounding them, loving them, thinking they're wonderful human beings, all right? And you could argue that people who use extroverted feeling or harmony as their inferior or 3-year-old process would be the least, the least adept at social skills. And yet these people, because they have focused on being the best version of themselves, are actually celebrated by the people around them. So if you can't do anything else to gain, quote unquote, greater social skills, if you can't game it, or you can't figure out how to become this totally, amazing, suave person, don't focus on that. Focus on being the best version of your type.
I would guess that the next two, motivation and empathy, are probably the biggest challenge because they seem to be empathy is very resonant. You have to resonate with somebody else. And you're a thinker, so that's why I'm kind of tossing this over your way. And then motivation is, again, getting internal and understanding, why am I doing something internally? What's the internal motivational emotion that's causing me to want to do this thing? Have you found as an ENTP that those are some of the most challenging in all of this because they're so internally focused?
I guess that's possible. I was fortunate enough to learn two very high leverage strategies very young for both of these, and they've helped me out as a thinker. Now, I'm going to be saying these from the perspective of an ENTP. All right. And ENTPs are not the same as INTPs. And they're not the same as ISTPs and ESTPs and INTJ. Like, all the thinking types are going to be slightly different in how they show up. So this is me as an ENTP. That said, I do believe that these two things could probably be very impactful and helpful for other thinkers. The first one is the concept of empathy. Now, we did a podcast, not a PHQ, but an actual personality hacker podcast on the 4 Greek definitions of love. And empathy falls in the category of love, right? Empathy could be argued, I heard it one time beautifully described as your pain in my heart, right? That's empathy. And that requires rapport. It requires a sense of simpatico. It requires understanding and the ability to get inside somebody else's experience, right? And so maybe the NTJs might have an easier time of this because they use introverted intuition or perspectives, which allows them to get inside somebody else's mind. But regardless of what type you are, what thinking type, that particular podcast talked about one of the definitions or the Greek words for love, which was defined as, it's called agape, and it's defined as principled love. And I've discovered that the more I can turn love into a principle, which is that I have a sympathy for and empathy for all of humanity as being valuable just because they're people, and for creatures, living creatures. I've actually turned my agape into all living things, right? The preciousness of life. And this doesn't really have to do with, an empathy for somebody's personal story. I actually, what's weird is that the closer the person is to me, the more I understand their individual circumstances, sometimes the less empathetic I get of them. Because I'm like, dude, you do realize that you did 10 things wrong to lead to this, right? Just go change those. But if a person is on the other side of the planet and they're experiencing pain, my justice triggers get massively all riled up, and I'm like, it's totally wrong that anybody's dying of malnourishment, right? That just rips my heart in two. And I've noticed that thinkers have a tendency to be a lot more in touch with their principled love, right? The closer you are to, maybe this is TPs. TJs might be the opposite because they have introverted feeling in their car or in their stack, authenticity. So actually, the closer you get to the NTJ, maybe the more empathy they have of you. For TPs, right? Thinker perceivers or those using accuracy, it might be more about principled love, which is the people that further away from me, or the creatures that seem the most vulnerable are the ones like animals and children and the elderly. Those seem to be the ones that I'm the most sympathetic of. But whatever it is that strikes your fancy, whatever it is that you feel a natural feeling of empathy for, just keep focusing on that and building it and seeing if you can extend it even further. See if you can replicate that natural feeling you're feeling for other people. So when I'm talking to somebody who's close to me, and I'm not feeling that much empathy for them because I'm like, dude, you do realize that you brought this on yourself. What I do is I try to call upon the empathy I feel for people I don't know. Somebody who seems in a really bad situation, maybe a refugee, or somebody who's dealing with, the blood diamond area, or somebody who's dealing with, whatever sort of tyranny that a person could be dealing with. And I replicate that experience that I have for that person. And then I try to apply that to the person who's close to me, realizing the only reason why I'm feeling that empathy for somebody I don't know is because I don't know their circumstances. I don't know the 10 things that led them there, right? So I go, you know what? I can feel this empathy for this person who I have a personal relationship with just as much, because it's the same thing that they're dealing with. They're dealing with something that they brought upon themselves, just like most people are dealing with something they brought on themselves. And That might not be true for the 4-year-old who's dying of malnourishment. That person didn't bring it on themselves, but I can still feel that same principled love for people close to me. And my guess is that the TJs, right, who have authenticity in their stack, that feeling that they have for somebody that they know very well, and they feel empathy for that person because they have a relationship with them, I'm sure that they can do the reverse of that, which is replicate that feeling of empathy that they have for, a person close to them, and see if they can turn that into a principled feeling for other people, in the world that maybe aren't as close to them. Maybe they can just sort of reverse mirror that piece.
I think that's a great reframe. I think embedded in this idea of empathy, we assume it has to be a personal feeling that we feel in the moment towards somebody. But this idea of principled love, I know you've had an impact on me in terms of thinking more in principled terms in love, and I think I've had an impact on you because I'm an NF, so I think more in terms of how somebody's impacting my emotions personally. And we just had this conversation this morning about the sense of family I bring to our relationship, and the sense of the personal dynamics and things. And I talked to you about this morning about how principled love was something on your radar. And I think both of us have learned. And I love that reframe, that it doesn't have to be, empathy doesn't mean it has to be super personal, super tied to the heart of one person. It can be something that's principled. And I think for you as a thinker, if you're listening, this is empowering to you. This is like, wow, I can have empathy without having that feeling in the moment with someone. I can just have it principled over time. Structural.
Everybody feels a sense of empathy unless they're a sociopath. All right. No, and that's because a sociopath doesn't have a sense of conscience, so they can't create empathy, they can't create intimacy. And one of the things that empathy does is it generates a sense of intimacy with another person, even if you're not actually intimate with them. So if you can call upon empathy in any context ever, and that includes like animals, right? Because I know a lot of thinkers who are like, I hate humans, but I love animals, right? That means you are not a sociopath. If you can empathize with any other living creature in any context ever, it means you're not a sociopath. So if you're a thinker and I've heard so many thinkers go, I'm borderline sociopathic. That's bullshit, okay? You're not a sociopath. If you can have any sense of empathy for anything ever, that means you're not a sociopath. So just throw that phrase away. And just grab on and hold on to those senses of empathy that you have, even if it's sporadic, even if it's staccato, even if it doesn't happen very often. And just like anything that we focus on, it will grow in our lives. The same thing with empathy. Now, the last one is motivation. And I don't actually think that anybody has the monopoly on motivation. I don't think feelers have I know so many feelers are like, I just don't know what to do in my life. I'm not going to do anything. And I know a lot of thinkers that are completely motivated, and vice versa. Motivation, from my perspective, and especially in relation to type theory, comes from understanding and feeding the need of your judging process or your decision-making process. So if you're a TJ, that's effectiveness. And if you're a TP, that's accuracy, right? TPs, it's accuracy or introverted thinking. For TJs, it's effectiveness or extroverted thinking. Fuel those processes. Make sure that they are sated, okay? That's how you get motivation. If you're a TJ and you're working with effectiveness, you will gain your motivation by seeing an impact in the world, right, that you built. And the more you do that, the more you'll get a taste for it. So if you're just like, oh, I'm a TJ, but I'm totally unmotivated, you haven't been doing enough effectiveness, all right? And that's usually ITJs. ETJs don't experience this quite as much. ITJs usually do because they're not getting in their copilot as much, or they're not getting into that auxiliary function. So make sure that you are seeing an impact for your hard work. Make sure that you're seeing how your ideas are coming out to the world, and you're understanding how you actually have an impact in the world around you. Now for TPs, ENTPs and INTPs, it's a little more difficult in the sense that you can't just make an impact in the outside world and then you got to get used to it and you get juiced. For thinker perceivers, those of us who use accuracy, I've noticed that the number one most important piece for motivation is clarity. It has to make sense. You have to have clarity. The more clarity you have, the more motivated you'll feel. And I remember this moment of, okay, so we have a dog. His name is Duncan. He's an adorable little like Springer Spaniel Golden Retriever mix. He was the dog that I owned with my previous husband, and I called him my divorce dog because in the divorce, I got the dog, right? And he's just traveled with me. I mean, he was born in Alaska. He traveled with me to Las Vegas. We drove all the way across the country. I took Duncan with me. We're now in Pennsylvania, and Duncan's just a part of my life and has been since 2008, 2009. So Duncan's my dog, right? And you and I, Joel, we do a lot of travel. And I never know what to do with Duncan, right? And there's a ranch that your parents have access to, or they basically, they run a camp. And I drop him off at the ranch a lot, but there's all sorts of problems there. There's horses he gets into, and he causes problems because he's a dog, right? And so I always have like this question of what do I do with Duncan? What do I do with Duncan? And then when it was winter time and we had dropped him off at the ranch and he had been there for a while, and it was super duper cold, I just had this moment of, I can't leave Duncan at the ranch. I just can't. It's way too cold, right? Like, I cannot do it. And I just had this moment of clarity. There was no more, what do I do with Duncan? There was a moment of clarity of, I got to go get Duncan. I have to bring him home. I don't care how filthy he is. I don't care how disgusting he is, like running, like rolling around in horse manure. I don't care how gross he's going to make the house. I have to go get him. And I had this moment of clarity. You and I actually...
You had this moment of clarity at 12:30 a.m.
Yeah.
On back snowy roads in the middle of backwoods Pennsylvania. We're both exhausted. Our daughter's like half asleep in the car, tired. We're trying to get home, and you all of a sudden have this moment of
clarity. There is nothing. Like, you and I had probably one of the biggest fights that we've ever had in our marriage, because you're like, let's just get him in the morning. I'm like, no, I have to have him tonight. And I had this moment of clarity, and you could not, I don't think there was anything that could have talked me out of it. I was going to actually stay with him in the freezing, frigid cold of, the ranch. Like, there's a doggy door that leads to the basement of this ranch house, and it's really super cold down there. And I was going to stay with Duncan if I couldn't bring him home. And it was just this moment of clarity. And even though that was like kind of a weird moment for you and I, and we were like, had this major fight over it, because you're like, dude, let's pick him up in the morning. We can give him a bath. We'll bring him home. He won't make our house disgusting. I always think back to that moment of clarity I had, where I couldn't do anything other than the thing that made complete and utter sense to me. I was so motivated to do it because it just made sense. Like, nothing else made sense but to go pick him up. And so I anchored that as that is my source of motivation. So if you're a TP and accuracy user, introverted thinking, think about those moments when you could, like, nobody could have talked you out of it. That was a moment of clarity. And the closer you can get to those moments of clarity for yourself, the higher motivation you'll have to do whatever it is you need to do. So seek clarity. And I don't think that motivation is the province of feelers. I really do believe that all of us, as long as we're accessing the evaluation criteria of our decision-making process, the more we hit the dead bullseye center of that decision-making process, the closer we'll get to motivation.
I want to say two things as we wrap up. And so first of all, the people, if you're a thinker listening right now, and you're joining us for this conversation, what I'm about to say may trigger the other people in your life, particularly feelers. And so you're going to need to explain to them that this is how you're going to come up as your best self, because it's going to maybe be distasteful for feelers who social interaction may come more naturally to them, and connection with people may come more natural to them. And so to use tools in order to do that may seem inauthentic or disingenuous to a feeler. Having said that, one of the suggestions I'll give you, and Antonia touched on this earlier, is using your strength of what you bring to the table, understanding metrics, understanding how data is sliced and diced, to bring that to the table by constructing a tool set for yourself. So we know an INTP who was teaching a relationship event. He's married to an INFP who's very in touch with her emotions. And he's constructed an entire set of tools that he carries with him in his relationship. Physical tools. He has like cards where he's written down different types of emotions that his wife experiences. And he's got like a grading system to these. And he'll literally, if she's in the middle of an emotional experience, he doesn't understand that. He's an INTP. It does not come natural to him to connect at that level. So he'll grab his little tool set, his cards physically, and he'll flip through and go, okay, what emotion are you experiencing? And he'll flip through. They've talked about it ahead of time, so it's not in the moment when there's like a fight or some emotional intensity. He'll flip through and try to find the emotion closest to what she's experiencing. And then he'll put a metric to that emotion. He'll say, okay, are you going from a 1 to 10? How strong is this for you? And he'll start getting down into the data of the actual emotion itself. He's created a system for himself to track metrics around the emotions his wife is feeling. And this gives him a tool set in order to engage with her. Now, again, that's going to take her, and she does. She shows up very open to this idea because she understands his personality. So she's very open to this. So if you're a thinker and you're like, oh, that sounds like a great idea, I can construct a whole metric system around this, you have to have a conversation ahead of time with the people in your life, particularly if they're feelers, because a lot of feelers might think, well, that just feels like you're using some kind of you're not really connected with me. You're using a card system and a rating system. That doesn't feel very heart-centric to me. And it takes a feeler understanding that, no, in fact, this is you showing up at your best self emotionally.
Well, and you're really trying. You are so trying to connect with them. It's just it's not your area of expertise.
But he's using his accuracy process, which is understanding data, putting metrics behind things, and understanding things from a metric standpoint in order to deal with his inferior process or his 3-year-old process of extroverted feeling, or what we've called harmony. And I think it's a great example of an INTP turning something that's his weakness into a strength by using the strength that's in his personality in order to deal with what others would say was a weakness. It's just a way to make up for the deficiencies there. And again, it's turning that into a metric. So I think that's just an example of something you can start thinking about. If you're a thinker, it doesn't matter what kind of thinker you are there ways that you can use your strength to deal with some of the ways that you are out of touch with your feelings, or you feel vulnerable with your feelings, or you feel out of control with your feelings?
Yeah, you might always have a higher IQ than you have EQ. That is likely. And that's okay, because we need both styles. Feelers might always have a higher EQ than they have IQ, and that's okay. We need all of it. When we all show up as our best self, then we're bringing that gift to the world, and the world needs both represented. So don't feel like you're a complete and utter failure if you're a thinker and your EQ is always something that you have to keep working on. And at the same time, feel free to bring your best self forward to make up for some of these blind spots and just have full self-acceptance around it. And like Joel mentioned, I think it's a great idea to make sure you're having conversations with the people in your life, especially if they're feelers, to go, this is not an attempt to dehumanize you or put you in a box. It's an attempt for me to make up for a blind spot in my life. And just show up as your best. Show up as your best is the most important thing you can do.
Yeah, I know another thinker that keeps files on the people that are important to him in his life, like their favorite things, their emotional states, the things they like and don't like, so that when he's in the moment of interaction, he has data to rely upon. It's like a tool set he brings to the table. Yeah. So you think in these terms, again, conversations ahead of time, though, to pre-frame it and let them know you're doing this for the relationship, or you're doing this to connect with them in your life, and this is how you're going to show up. So great question, Lillian. Thanks so much for it. I think this has been a great conversation. If you've got more questions around this specific topic or a comment, you can leave that underneath this particular podcast.
Yeah, and if you're a thinker and you figured out some strategies for increasing your EQ, we would love to hear them. So please add them to the conversation.
Absolutely. I think that will help everybody involved, feelers and thinkers that are listening. You can find more information about Personality Hacker and obviously leave your comments and questions at personalityhacker.com. If you have a specific question for us that you would like us to discuss on air, you can go to personalityhacker.com/questions. That's /questions. You can ask your question via an online form there, or you can record your question and we can edit it directly into the podcast. So you can record it right from your computer. Again, that's personalityhacker.com/questions. We'd also like to invite you to come over to our Facebook community of people just like you, like minds, growing community, facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast over at iTunes or the Android platform of your choice, and we would love to have you be a part of our conversations every week. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next PHQ Questions from the Personality Hacker community.